Hello and welcome to Talk Radio's Clashes of the Week. I'm Phil Dave. Coming up.
I mean, I would push back on that statistic. I don't think that's quite accurate. I mean, all the research shows that, there aren't significant increases on congestion.
I'm sorry. You're genuinely telling me that London isn't more congested? Well, and if that's the case, then why do we need a congestion charge near ULEZ?
Ah yes, additional road charges, whether that be congestion charges or pollution charges. Let's just find more ways of making life for motor vehicles as miserable as possible, shall we? Also,
can you explain why America, which has its abundant supplies of shale gas that they are extracting from their ground, why has America barely been touched by the huge hike in global gas prices? Why is that?
Well, America is being touched.
No, Donica, that is not true. Answer the question.
No, hang on. Let me answer you.
You just lied.
a bit of a theme to this week's show, the subject of, the cost of energy, causing a bit of tension for Julia Hartley-Brewer and her guest this week. Plus,
What in a theatre of war, going out there?
I thought you said there wasn't a war.
Look, we've got our own soldiers going out there. We've got our own soldiers going out there that, for all intents and purposes,
so you don't think they should go?
Could get captured,
right?
And the Russians can just say, well, look, these are terrorists. Put them up against.
Have you ever been in a
war
war zone, Richard?
all that and more on Clashes of the Week. But first, additional road charging is already a common feature in many cities around this great country of ours, whether that be ULEZ or congestion charge or even the numerous CAZs, clean air zones, of course. The Knight Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has said that he wants to extend the ULEZ, or the ultra-low emission zone, to cover the whole of Greater London. Give me strength. Well, this doesn't affect me, I hear you cry. Well, make no mistake, it doesn't affect you now. But don't think that you're exempt from this being introduced in other cities over the next however many years. Christo discussed this with Hira Khan Adiogan, head of the Car-Free Cities campaign. She sounds delightful.
But Krista, what I'm saying, and tell me where I'm going wrong here, but what I'm saying is it's not just that the journey is longer because you might be sitting in congestion. What I'm saying is that the journey is actually longer because you're not taking the shortest route.
What's the difference? Okay, let's take out the congestion.
Because kilometres-wise, that's increasing your
journey.
So
you want us to drive longer?
What I'm saying is I don't want you to drive at
Hira,
all.
do you acknowledge that a longer car journey is more polluting?
It is more polluting.
So why are you advocating taking longer car journeys?
Because people are currently taking car journeys because they think it's the quickest option. But if it's no longer the quickest option, a lot of people will reconsider and take walking and cycling. And actually, Christo, the research shows that that's what's happened. In LTNs, walking and cycling has gone up. There's been a 6% reduction in car ownership when we looked in Waltham Forest and what's happened there.
No, Waltham Forest is flawed research from Imperial College, which is based on modelling rather than actually what has happened.
Oh, no, I'm talking about research that we've done with the Active Travel Academy at the University of Westminster.
Which is authored also by a person in association with the London Cycling Campaign. So it hardly could be called unbiased research, firstly. And secondly, yes, you're quite right. You close roads to traffic. Of course, there's going to be a reduction within those areas of road traffic. But what about the boundary roads? What about all of those main roads, those A roads and B roads around all of those areas that are now utterly congested, more polluting, and actually less friendly for walking and cycling? It's the most backward logic.
So what I would say is LTNs are not the perfect solution. LTNs work for minor roads, you're absolutely right. But this is why the smart road user charging scheme is such a brilliant thing.
So
and why
more
we need
penalising of drivers.
Helps. Well, what would you suggest, Chris?
I would suggest incentivising people. I've got an awful lot of suggestions if you're interested in them. You incentivise people. You incentivise a lower level of car ownership by giving reductions in council tax if you get rid of your vehicle. You make public transport a third of the price. You do a buyback scheme on the most polluting of vehicles. What you do is you make people's lives easier by making the right decision rather than penalising them by making their journeys longer and having them sitting in traffic and unable to access their own homes.
Christo, I absolutely agree with you on all three.
Then why are you advocating making people's lives worse?
What I'm saying is it requires, all the suggestions you put forward require money. Unfortunately, the government we currently have has been investing in more road building, investing in fossil fuels. They're not investing.
No. They're investing in cycle lanes, and half of them aren't being used. And if your logic were to work, if your logic were to actually work, then therefore everyone would be on their bikes now in these new cycle lanes that we've had built, and there wouldn't be any of this congestion on A roads.
Well, actually, the research shows that building cycle lanes increases the amount of people who will choose to cycle. And that's what we saw during the pandemic with these cycle lanes. In London, cycling went up 200%.
Yes, 200%. Yes, because it's funny how they give percentages. 200% is actually basically 3 people cycling instead of 1 person cycling. I mean, percentages sort of don't mean an awful lot. It's the hard numbers I would like to see, and I would also like to see some cyclists actually in the cycle lanes while I'm sat in congestion watching them.
Of course, you know what the biggest joke is about all of these clean air charges were, don't you? Well, they were introduced by governments and councils whose elected officials' primary focus is the working person. In other words, those who might not necessarily be the wealthiest in society. And yet, who do you think is going to be the most affected by these charges that applies to an older vehicle? Correct. Those who are from a background that can't necessarily afford to change their car to a modern and low-polluting one. They are the ones who have to pay this nonsense every single day. It is so obvious why there has been an increase in congestion. Shutting off many of the side roads and back roads, and on the main roads as well, increasing traffic light numbers, and then question why there's an increase in congestion. Are you serious? Have you ever actually been at a junction during rush hour and the traffic lights are out? Have you ever noticed how there's less traffic at that junction, and that it is not a coincidence that that is the case? Now, I appreciate it's not all junctions where the traffic lights fail, but it is a fair argument to suggest that a considerable number of them are. Welcome back to Talk Radio's Clashes of the Week with me, Phil Dave. Climate change protesters have said that they intend to block major UK oil refineries next month and take a stand to stop fossil fuels once and for all. Yes, because there's nothing more important going on at the moment. Let's all turn our attention to hugging a tree, shall we? Julia Hartley-Brewer brought this up on The Breakfast Show this week. I feel like bringing up my breakfast, to be honest with you. Anyway, she spoke with Donncha McCarthy, a climate columnist for The Independent.
It would cost around £5 billion to operate that to modern terms. I'm talking about £1 billion for 5 years, and our roofs are sorted. That cuts energy usage and bills by 20 to 25%.
But we're still going to need reliable energy. I'm all for insulating homes. I'm all for all that. But I'm not going to let that go. This earthquakes and poisoned water risk from fracking natural shale gas. No. I'm sorry. When you talk about earthquakes, you're talking about a bus going by on the road outside your house to 20 metres away and feeling, oh yes, that we are talking about, this is a load of nonsense. We're not talking about earthquakes. The poison water thing, again, complete load of fake news coming from America. We've got far greater environmental protections in this country. There's no reason at all for that to happen. And you say this wouldn't bring prices down. Can you explain why America, which has its abundant supplies of shale gas that they are extracting from their ground, why has America barely been touched by the huge hike in global gas prices? Why is that?
Well, America is being touched.
No, Donncha, that is not true. Answer the question.
No, hang on. Let me answer you.
You just lied. But you just told an untruth. They are
you
not.
Didn't let me.
They're not.
You didn't allow me finish the sentence
Answer
before
the question.
accusing me of lying. I will. If you allow me finish the sentence, then you accuse me of lying. America inflation in gas is not the same as Europe. You're right, but they do have gas inflation because they're
tiny bit.
No, it's around 50%, where ours is around 400%. The reason why ours is higher is because we are part of a European-Russian network that actually we are part of a global market in gas. And if you increase UK gas supplies, which is around 1% of the global market, you do not reduce bills for homeowners. If you insulate homeowners, you do reduce their bills.
You could do both. What's wrong with doing both, Donncha?
Why invest millions and billions in a fossil fuel that will actually damage us and not bring down our...
No, because shale gas is a cleaner fossil fuel than the existing gas supplies we're using. We're going to be importing gas. There is no sensible person who talks about energy policy in this country around the world who doesn't believe that for the next 80 years, no matter how much we push for renewable energy, we will not still be reliant on gas. So 80% of the fuel used in this world is gas still, in which case we should be using the cleanest gas. Gas that is reliable, that is cleaner, that is under our feet, is the obvious answer there.
No, well, please explain how fracked gas is any cleaner than North Sea. It is clean.
I'm not look. I don't pretend to be an energy expert. All of the documentation I've seen shows that it is clean in terms of the extraction methods, in terms of how it is used. It is cleaner than the imported gas.
In what way is it cleaner? What way is it cleaner?
I don't claim to be an energy expert.
Okay, well, fine. That's fair enough. I actually do a reasonable amount of research. And the problem with fracking, putting aside the earthquakes and the...
There aren't earthquakes from fracking.
I said putting it aside.
Well, there's no point putting it aside if it's not happening.
Well, we disagree. Will we disagree on it?
No, it's not a question of disagreeing. There aren't earthquakes from fracking. It's a nonsense.
The question was about how clean fracking is versus North Sea oil or LNG gas. The reason why fracking is dirtier is because it has hundreds upon hundreds of wells that actually leak methane. And methane is 100 times more powerful global warming gas than carbon dioxide. And that's why it is dirtier than normal gas supplies.
But of course, when we're getting gas supplies, liquefied natural gas, LNG, as you say, when it's being shipped around the world, there's simply no cost for that. Why not nuclear power? If you don't like the shale gas, why not nuclear power? Why are so many Greens opposed to what is the cleanest and safest form of energy that we currently have that is also 100% reliable? Why are you opposed to nuclear?
Well, I think you should ask the people of Ukraine and Chernobyl why we're against.
Why? And the answer would be
because it's actually incredibly dangerous.
It's not incredibly. No, that is simply not true.
And if you ask the people of Japan why we need to move away from, and actually
how many people died in Fukushima?
Let's put that aside.
How many people died? How many people died in Chernobyl?
I have to say, I am mightily impressed that Donnachie was brave enough to actually speak to Julia about this in the first place. Now, I'm all in favour of cleaner energy, but not at any cost. I understand the enthusiasm by some to try and get to a situation where we're working with cleaner energy, but it's got to be gradual. If we could stop with this ghastly narrative that somehow we're all going to die if we don't act now, that would probably win over more people. Progression takes time, exactly the same way that for a considerable number of years, horse and carts were phased out to make way for the motor car. The same thing will happen with renewable, cleaner energy, but you cannot press the fast forward button and expect everyone to go around hugging trees and eating broccoli. This is Clashes of the Week here on Talk Radio with me, Phil Dave. I wonder if you can guess what the next subject is. Yes, energy. Hurrah. Well, if only the sparks that were created off the back of this topic this week could somehow go back into the national grid, perhaps we wouldn't have the issues we've got. Julia spoke with Bill Esterton MP, who is the Shadow Minister for Business and Industry. Let's just say that it would be very useful to be able to harvest the energy generated from this particular discussion.
And now we've got to put that straight, and that's got to be where the future is, because whatever we do, we've still got a climate emergency, haven't we, Julia?
We haven't got a climate emergency. I love that you put nuclear in with wind, tide and solar. I hate to tell you.
Hang on a minute. Bill,
we've got important things to discuss instead of pie in the sky stuff. Can we talk about the realities of ordinary people's bills right now?
Are you telling me we haven't got a climate emergency?
Yes, 100% we haven't got a climate emergency. Can we move on and talk about the realities of actually facing people's lives?
Well, we have to do both, but that's why we've got an immediate policy to get energy bills down.
You talk about a sprint. There isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. And the massive failures by the last few Conservative governments, no doubt at all on energy policy. Massive failures also by Blair and Brown as well. But yeah, the Tories take most responsibility because they have been in power for the last goodness knows how many years. But this is the thing. You put wind, tide and solar power in with nuclear. Nuclear is reliable. None of the other three are. Why do you put them in the same bracket?
Wind is a very reliable.
Talk me through September.
Technology.
What happened last September
when
the wind didn't blow?
Very reliable technology.
What happened last September when the wind didn't blow, Bill?
You have to have a combination. That's why you put tidal in as well, because tidal, like nuclear, is a baseload contributor. That's why we needed the tidal lagoon.
What percentage of our energy needs can we
need the tidal scheme in the River Mersey, where there are an MP, and there are very good plans all the way up the west coast.
What percentage of our energy can we get from tidal?
Well, we need to develop the technology to find these things out. We didn't know.
Oh, so we can't do it now.
Wind. We didn't know from.
Right.
We didn't know from nuclear either. But we do need to invest in these things. Otherwise, we're going to continue to rely on oil and gas and continue to put CO2 and methane into the atmosphere.
What about fracking?
To raise global warming.
What about getting shale gas from underneath our feet? Labour's opposed to that. Why?
It's not. It's a long. It would take years and years to.
So will nuclear power stations?
Well, the government should have been doing that.
Yes, they should have. They should have been fracking.
They've laid the plans for Sizewell C. But if we go down the road of fracking, we are just adding to the contribution to global warming. So that can't be the answer to it.
Well, apart from the fact that
what we do need is to bring forward. We need to bring forward the clean energy contribution of wind, of tidal, of solar, and we need to get on with nuclear. Those are the key elements in this. And in the meantime, we're going to need to find alternatives to.
There are no energy experts that don't think, as I was pointing out to Donica McCarthy, who don't think that we're going to be reliant on gas for many, many decades ahead, in which case clean, natural gas fracked underneath our feet and reliable and secure would make more sense. You mentioned we should cut VAT if we want to keep energy bills down. We could also cut all the green subsidies as well, couldn't we? And if we did cut VAT, which other taxes should go up?
Look, I'm not going to pretend to have all the answers when it comes to the energy crisis and the prices. Of course, I say crisis, but I would have thought that the way to deal with the energy issues we have, and actually please don't use the word crisis, what is happening in the Ukraine is clearly a crisis. Those in other nations who are in abject poverty, that is a crisis. It is not a crisis that we might need to wear less jumpers in winter. And frankly, with the cost of energy as it stands, maybe that might be helpful. On to the subject of energy again. Almost 40 Conservative MPs and peers have issued a plea to Boris Johnson to reverse plans to seal up two of the country's only viable shale gas wells. This, of course, is in a bid to see that the UK can develop something in the way of energy independence. Ian Collins spoke with Michael Jacobs, former special advisor to Gordon Brown whilst he was Prime Minister, and Ben Harris-Quinney, chairman of the Bow Group, the world's oldest Conservative think tank. What could possibly go wrong with that lineup?
No, I think fracking could make a big difference, but I don't think that you should make this debate just about fracking. It's really about delivering cheap energy, and so the government should be doing everything it can to that cause, reopening coal power plants, reopening gas storage facilities, exploring more in North Sea gas, and yes, also looking at shale. The net zero agenda and a combination of global crises has delivered to the average British citizen a crippling set of energy bills, and that's not a sustainable situation.
I mean, that's a fair
really
point.
Needs to wake up to that.
Michael Jacobs, that is a fair point, isn't it? As Ben rightly identified, I don't think any of us would disagree on this. There is a cost of living crisis, even away from the Russian component to this. This stuff is getting incredibly expensive. We need to look at all ways that we can to get energy, whether it's greater ambitions in the North Sea, whether it's nuclear, whether it's fracking.
So we really do need to unpick these different sources of energy. So I'm very surprised that Ben has decided to go down the route of claiming that gas from shale would reduce energy bills. Energy bills are rocketing, but the reason they're rocketing is because the global price of gas has gone up. And if there were fracked gas in the UK, it would be sold at just below the marginal price. So there would be no benefit on price from fracking in the UK. The National Audit Office, which is the independent body set up by government to look at the value for money of UK policies, came to exactly that conclusion after a proper economic inquiry. And the reason for that is the same. Can I finish, please? I allowed you to speak.
Ben, I'll come straight back to you, Ben, after this point from Michael.
To make all the points that you made, and I sat there listening, so you could do the same. So the National Audit Office was very clear in its look at fracking that fracking would not reduce the price. In the same way that North Sea oil and gas, if we produced a bit more, would not reduce the price. And this is because these things are sold in markets where you just undercut the lowest other price in the market. And that is now very high. So we definitely need to deal with the cost of living crisis, most of which is now coming from energy, although unfortunately not just that. We're going to have food prices higher and so on. So we agree that the real crisis here for the UK citizens is the cost of living crisis. So the question is, what kinds of energy will most reduce bills? And the answer to that is energy efficiency is the first thing. What will most reduce your bill is if your house is well insulated. So that's what we should be putting most of our effort into, because that cuts your bills and also incidentally reduces greenhouse gas emissions, which is what we must do for the climate. The second cheapest form of energy is onshore wind. It's now cheaper than increasing our coal or our gas production. There is a ban currently on onshore wind, which the Conservative government introduced. That's really not sensible. We should be allowing more onshore wind. And then you come to the other possible forms of energy. Nuclear could be cheap, but won't be quick. And unfortunately, that's just not a short-term solution. Offshore wind is pretty quick. We're closing coal-fired power stations. We're not, because they are reaching the end of their life and so on. So I think, and the crucial thing, the final point is, we do have to deal with this, but it would be absolutely terrible to deal with this issue in a way that just creates a long-term and medium-term climate change issue.
All right.
And we have the opportunity to meet both of our problems here in the same way, not to abandon the climate question simply because we have a cost of living.
Ben, you were shouting at the beginning of that's not true. What wasn't true that you heard from Michael Jacobs?
Well, it's not true that producing or accessing our own gas supplies wouldn't reduce the cost. If Michael is saying that, can he explain why it is so much cheaper in the United States, where they produce a lot of their energy or source a lot of their energy domestically? Can he explain why it's cheaper in Russia, where they source their energy domestically? Can he explain why it's cheaper in Saudi Arabia, where they do the same thing?
Yes, I can. And the answer to that...
No, Michael, sorry, you said that you wanted to have your...
Well, I thought you were asking me a question, so I was going
to... Okay. Finish your sentence, Ben, and then we'll throw that back to Michael.
Well, no, I'd like a chance to respond to Michael's point. So the fact is that nations that produce their own energy not only get it cheaper, they also have the benefit of energy security, and it's far greener, because what we are doing at the moment, under the guise of the green agenda, is we are simply importing energy from overseas, which is very carbon intensive where it is produced, and it's also very carbon intensive to transport it to the United Kingdom. So the current policy we have, and indeed perhaps Michael agrees with this, but the current policy we have is the worst of all worlds. It's very high cost and it's very high carbon. Now, again, you have to return to the point that the UK's energy policy needs to be self-reliant. So if that means that we can achieve that on wind, that's great. I don't think that is the case. But the drive of the policy must be energy security and the cheapest possible energy for the UK consumer, regardless of any highfalutin net zero ideas, unless that idea has been tested in a referendum against the British public and there's fulsome support for it. At the moment, what I'm seeing is fulsome support for cheaper energy. That's what this government isn't delivering. That's what decades of energy policy hasn't delivered. And I see nothing in what Michael is saying that would deliver that.
I wonder how many people have changed their stance on energy harvesting within the past few weeks, since everything that has gone on in the Ukraine. The problem is, if we are dependent on Russia for whatever percentage of our energy, shouldn't we be doing all we can to make sure that we are independent in that way? Now think about it. We have spent a great number of years handing over everything to other countries, whether it be our energy to France, Russia and others, whether it be our laws and decision-makings over to the EU and Brussels, of course, not to mention our manufacturing over to China. What on earth is wrong with us? We used to be such a strong country. Where has that gone? Now, I have to say, it does seem logical to me, and I'm not necessarily claiming to be an expert here, you understand, on energy, far from it, but surely if we can get our own resources from our own shores, it has to be cheaper than going elsewhere, right? This week saw International Women's Day for 2022. Our very own Julia Hartley-Brewer made a list of women in Westminster, which of course consists of inspirational females. Julia brought this up with Baroness Jenkin of Kennington, of course closely associated with said list. Why do I get the feeling that they're not going to see eye to eye on this?
I'm not entirely sure why we can talk about these people being inspirational. Well, they've just been born a woman and happen to have a job.
Well, first of all, when you were starting out in the Westminster world, Julia, you probably couldn't have even managed to have 100 women that you could have thought of. And so I think it is an opportunity to celebrate, to showcase not just MPs, because there's a very wide variety of people from different backgrounds there. There are civil servants, there are lots of journalists, including you, all of whom are inspirational in that they have achieved still in a man's world. And I think young people, look, obviously, if you want to be curmudgeonly about it.
I mean, I'm sorry, we've had 2 female prime ministers. When do we stop wringing out the handkerchiefs?
Well, when we have more women that are, those 2 were an aberration, if you like. I mean, in my own party, we're still only 25% women MPs.
When have you stood for office? You're a peer. When have you stood for office then?
I stood in 1987, thank you, and I had a good go at it. It wasn't for me, and so
it wasn't for you. Maybe a lot of women are far too sensible to want to be an MP.
Julia, look, this is not for everybody. It's a tough gig, you know that. But people still say to me today, why does it matter? You're saying that to me now, and I think it matters because women's life experiences are different to men. They're not superior, they're not inferior, but they are different. And you will know that at the moment, women do feel under pressure in this country in particular. Well, not only in this country, I didn't mean to say that because you'll pull me up on it. Across the world, there are, of course, it's a day for me. I reflect how lucky I am to live in this country, not to experience FGM, early in child marriage, no education, let alone what they're going through.
Women feel under pressure. I don't feel under pressure from female genital mutilation or forced marriage. That's not something that affects the average British woman or the average Western woman at all. These are particular cultural issues that affect...
I didn't say that. I said it's an opportunity to reflect how lucky we are in this country that we don't have any of that.
Yeah, I'm so fed up of everyone in this world finding differences to divide us. I know there are obvious differences between men and women, but they are purely biological. There isn't one fibre of my being that suggests that just because someone is male or female, that they can't achieve whatever they want. And I have no doubt that you'll say, well, that's easy for you to think like that, being a white British male. However, a massive part of this has got to be mind over matter. If you think that you are less of a human because you're not male, that is on your head be it. I don't remember in my working lifetime where someone made a decision to employ someone or not because they were female. And I don't know anyone in my age bracket where men and women keep the home and have their careers. I don't know one woman who isn't subservient to her husband. And I know plenty of men, by the way, who are subservient to their wives, but that's another matter. This is not to say that both men and women have faced societal pressures. Of course they have. Everyone has to some degree. And they've already experienced horrible instances. But it's not the case for everyone. And to tarnish everyone with the same brush, in my humble opinion, is not only bonkers, but actually highly damaging. Mike Graham spoke with David in Kent on the subject of the war in Ukraine, and here's what happened.
Well, I think if we'd have just left Ukraine as a neutral country, I don't think any of this would have happened.
Well, it's not a question of whether it's a neutral country. It's what people in Ukraine want it to be, isn't it?
Well,
I've said in the past I don't think it was a great idea to invite Ukraine into the European Union. However, if the people in Ukraine want to be part of the European Union, what's wrong with that?
Well, do they all want to be part of the European Union?
I don't know. I haven't asked them all. Have you?
I don't know what the shape of democracy looks like in Ukraine. I mean, I don't know how this guy Zelensky got to power.
Well, you seem to know a lot about everything else. Why don't you know how democracy works in Ukraine?
I'm just putting the question out there. You know, Mike, I would like to see a more transparent media, giving sort of more angles on the story rather than just. Which
angles have you not seen covered?
Well, I don't know what I've not been seen covered.
Well, there you go then. So you suspect there might be things you haven't seen, like a known unknown.
Well, I've heard people phone talk radio.
Yeah.
That claim to be from the middle of a war zone.
Yes.
Where the line is actually clearer than me ringing in from Tunbridge.
Yeah, well, that's because the broadband in this country is bloody awful. The best, you know, where we get the best signal from when Ben Habib rings in from Karachi.
Well, I doubt if it's a war zone in Ukraine.
Why do you doubt it's a war zone in Ukraine? Because they've got a decent line.
Yeah, well...
Really?
Do you think that's... Well, it seems to be crystal clear when somebody rings in from Ukraine and speaks to James Rail. James
Rail?
11 o'clock at night.
Well, why wouldn't it be? You know, as you say, we live in a global world. Everybody's got Wi-Fi now.
Well, because there's Russian fighter jets and all sorts of rockets and bombs going off in the middle of the place, isn't there? Yet when these people ring in, it seems to be absolutely...
Well, you tend not to ring in when you're under rocket attack. It's a bit difficult to be heard.
Well, you might hear a little bit in the background.
I see. So you don't think there's a war going on at all then? So what do you want to stop exactly?
I do think there's a war going on, but I think there are actors at play in
Actors?
this war. And I think there are people that are deliberately stoking it up.
Really? Is there a war or not? Though if they're deliberately stoking it up, there's not a war, is there?
And that's it for this edition of Clashes of the Week. From me, Phil D, thank you for the pleasure of your company. And make sure you stay tuned to the home of common sense. Of course, this is Talk Radio.